Om Shanti, continued from part 15. We were recalling the experiences of B.K. Hruday Moini ji. And the same continues. She said, Baba would walk so lovingly among the children when the satsang was over for the day, and his pure and fatherly vision would fall on all around him. And the warmth could be felt, the sense of belonging, of having made it to home base, where one was safe forever, safe and secure. When he spoke so sweetly, "Oh child," it was as if bouquets of flowers sprang up in the heart, and the cage of flesh was left behind. The soul flew like a liberated bird to the highest heavenly abode, and sang for the purest joy that any being could imagine. "Oh Baba," cried the soul in return. "Oh Baba," the words were on the lips of all, and the tears of happiness would fall from grown men's eyes like ghee upon a shivling. Every single person there, whether civic leaders or little children, experienced one thing: the Father of all souls, the primogenitor of the world, the one who teaches true religion, is standing in our midst. Even those who had never met him before, those who came to satsang for the first time, felt such a transformative experience that they automatically considered him their father. The hardest hearts melted in his presence. Here was life, here was happiness, here was power. Outside was the world of death. Here was peace, here was undiluted truth. Here was courage. Out there was poisonous speech, delusion, and moral cowardice. Out there all one could do was pray. In here, one found the answer to all prayers. Here, in person, stood the purifier, Baba. Tired of wandering through a suffering world, weary of the wheel of life, longing for a homeward flight, I happened to stumble here to Om Mandali. Now, the soul sweetly sings, flying to the world of light. I have died the living death, and I am free. Now I know the aim of life. Now I have found my home, and now at last I have met God. Each morning I bathe in the ocean of silence. I drink nectar from the cup of truth. I walk in the path of happiness, and my feet never touch the ground. Such were the intoxicated responses of those whose lives were forever changed by meeting Baba. Rich and poor, the famous and the indigent, sat side by side in equanimous brotherhood and spiritual grandeur. It was a simple satsang, and yet it seemed a royal court somehow, the court of Indra, and the famous deity of Indian mythology. Indra was the god of rain, and Shiv Baba brought a rain of knowledge, a rainfall of beauty, a hurricane of power, an eye of peace. All wore white clothes there, and it sometimes appeared to be a congregation of graceful swans, those who picked up only pearls, birds of purity, beings of light. Those women who had been so caught up in fashion before let a greater beauty in their simple, shimmering white saris. The outer simplicity allowed the inner beauty to become all the more strikingly apparent. High thoughts, sweet speech, brotherly vision, pure intentions, these were the elements of a knowledgeful personality. These were the results of Baba's impact on the soul. They had imbibed the spirit of purity, inspired by Baba's own life, by the power contained in his every act and gesture and word. The old life of desire, of lust, of egotism seemed filthy to them now, seemed poisonous and animalistic. By drinking the nectar of knowledge, their lives had become new and shining once again. A unique joy permeated them all, and it was not difficult for them to decide to retain that thrilling sense of elevation and happiness at all costs. To live the life of a yogi in celibacy and in a silence, to remember God and to fill the mind with His attributes, to live the life of a householder, yet as a lotus flower in the world, yet not of it. This was the golden determination of all. We shall lead a pure life, they vowed, and remain out of the mud of mental instability and body consciousness. The satsang continued to grow, and with the increase in numbers, a formal structure was needed. Varieties of classes were necessary for the people at different levels of spiritual development. The knowledge had to be revised and organized into books so that it would be available to the public. All this took administrative leadership and money. Therefore, it was the will of the Supreme Guru, Shiv Baba, that Brahma appoint someone to be in charge, and that Brahma should donate all of his money to the furtherance of God's spiritual academy. In October 1937, Om Radhe and 8 other women formed a trust committee for the new institution, which was called the PrajaPita Brahma Kumaris Ishwariya Vishwa Vidyalaya, the Godly World Spiritual University. Om Radhe took charge of administrating the institution, and she became the leading teacher as per Shiv Baba's wishes. Thereafter, Brahma Baba gave away the entirety of his worldly wealth and property to the trust committee. He gave charge of all the university's affairs into the hands of the women. His sole task was now faithfully to fulfill the role of being God's medium and to take responsibility for being a complete example of surrender to the will of the highest. Om Radhe took over the reins firmly and smoothly, operating the university on a day-to-day basis, applying the godly principles of economy and simplicity, yet making sure that every visitor felt perfectly at home. She remained detached in her part of administrator, employing her own well-developed powers of judgment and discrimination, combined with her inner gentleness and cooperativeness, to make sure that all who worked in the institution continued to function harmoniously and happily. She herself always remembered that it was God's work she was performing, not her own. The knowledge taught to others, and on the basis of which she had attained her personal fulfillment, was given directly by the Supreme One. She was only His instrument. Her duty was to be ever obedient to God's wishes. And because she succeeded so perfectly in maintaining this consciousness, she became loved by all. They called her Mama. Even her own mother began to call her that. Shiv Baba called her Jagadamba, World Mother, and he informed her that all the temples of Ambaji, all the devotional, that is, Bhakti pictures, were her memorials. Mama worked non-stop to fulfill the prediction contained in those words. The godly university was an abode of peace and harmony, but the outside world was assuredly not. The fledgling school ran into opposition almost immediately from outside. The main objection was God's insistence on purity. Husbands did not take well into the idea of their wives becoming celibate. Fathers were nonplussed at their daughter's decision to forego marriage. A tremendous tumult began to build around the issue. It was all right if men wanted to take up lives of renunciation, but for women to do so, this was something extraordinary, and many men could not tolerate it. Of course, Baba foresaw all this, and so, at the very beginning, he told all who wished to attend his satsang, whether they were young girls or married women, that they must bring with them a written letter of permission from either father or husband or guardian. Once the permission to attain the godly school had been granted, those relatives would be bound by it and difficulties avoided. However, it was not so simple. Many husbands flatly refused to sign such letters. They felt that they were lord and master over the wife, that a wife is a chattel, a domestic servant, and they were not about to give up their rights to such a valuable object. Others saw that this gathering was changing the lives of those people in other subtler ways, which threatened the materialistic basis on which the household had been used to operating. It was embarrassing to some families for the daughter to be seen wearing a plain white sari all the time and eschewing the very status symbols which the father worked so hard to attain. Having a religious person in the house deflated the pompous atmosphere which many were accustomed to. Their conscience would prick to see a brother or sister follow the highest code of conduct while they themselves engaged in a life of decadence. So, the difficulties mushroomed as Baba's spiritual children became firmer on the path of purity. Boys also encountered problems with their families, expected grandchildren, but would not get them. And why were these sons not eating their mother's cooking anymore? Why did they insist on such pure diets? The families could not understand. Despite the best efforts of Baba's children to explain, this knowledge would not fit into most people's intellects. Yet, at the very same time, they were pleased at the transformation they observed in so many respects. Those who followed Baba's directions became responsible, active, honest, thrifty, peaceful, understanding, thoughtful, forgiving, detached, and lovely. It was unbelievable how many virtues they had acquired as if from thin air. Children who had had the habit of sleeping until noon were now arising at 4 a.m. for meditation. Those who had been indolent and jobless were now working and achieving independence. Their families watched incredulously. How could a person be so down to earth and at the same time talk about divine revelations, world destruction, meeting God, in short, use the language of crackpots and dreamers? The two by right should not mix, and yet they did with eminent harmony. Something very strange was going on indeed. To be continued in the next episode. Om Shanti.